just zigzag and the hardest possible way to get compression through there if their gaps are opposite each other. Never front and back. But if in case you're not sure, Summit Racing do fortunately give you the instructions of where to place the rings, and well, I've just made some measurements there of what my actual gap measured is, which is 0.55 to 0.6 millimeter on the ring gap when I measured it in the cylinder after honing, so that's pretty good. Some of them are slightly more than that, but that's good, because at least I know I'm not going to get any heat seizures up with the heat causing the rings to close up and basically seizing inside the cylinder. So all perfect. Here we're going to start fitting the big end shells. You know, even if you're trying to change some things on the engine and you're scrimping and saving a little bit on the money of your parts, it's probably not a good idea to save on these unless they're really in good condition. I mean, my old ones are really in good condition anyway, but still, I like to have new ones. It just gives the engine the best chance, because that's a really a part that is a wearing part that is noticeable on the age of an engine. And so here's my big end shells. I'll put in one in here and one in the cap on the other side, and then we'll measure it up with some plastic gauge as we've done with the main. I like to just give the big ends just a slight light wipe with a bit of 1200 wet and dry, just to make sure they're nice and clean and there's no bits of residue of anything that's in there. Not to be sanded down, but just to clean up. So then put that edge into there, push the bearings into place, and the same on the other side on this one. Put that into there, just push it into place by hand. There we go. Now I've got a perfect pair. We're now about to put the piston ring squeezer over the piston rings. If you don't have one of these tools that tightens up on the piston ring, don't try and put pistons in by pushing them in with a screwdriver or pliers or something stupid like that. You will break them. So basically you need a piston ring squeezer. Before we start, we give the piston up a good dosing of oil, so that there's plenty of oil in the rings before we even start. Then we place the position of them, which is quite simple. So I'm looking for the oil ring gap. Okay, that's the very bottom one, slightly off to one side, and then I'll take the next one, which will be around about here. That's the second ring, and then the top ring will be opposite. And when tightening that, just make sure that you keep the piston ring squeezer, that thing, in the same place, and in that way you won't have any problem with the piston rings turning around and being in a different place or anything like that. So I tighten that up now, oopsie, by keeping that still. It's tight. That'll go into the cylinder easily now. Yeah, the piston is ready to go in. So the first thing I do is I generally start on cylinder number 1, and the first thing I need to do is make sure the journal is right at the bottom dead center for that. So there you see the piston. The first thing I need to do is lubricate up that cylinder, not the journal. I put the journal in dry. In other words, the big end on the crankshaft stays dry, but I make sure that I lubricate up the cylinder, and then I make sure that the dots on the front face the front. That's the same as the piston has a dot on it. That dot has to face the front, which is the camshaft side, so, the camshaft chain side. And then I slide in these lovely Summit pistons. Then I tap it in gently with the back end of a hammer. Here's the hammer, but the back end, notice I put some tape on it because when I knock that, I don't want bits of wood coming off and going into my cylinder. So I put my hand on there gently and just tap it into place. Let me just tap the ring squeezer to make sure that is perfectly on the cylinder, so there's nothing sticking out. So I'll knock that in and I hold the cylinder at the same time. And there we go. First cylinder is in. Here we are now, just about to measure the oil clearance on the big ends, and as you can see, I've got some plastic gauge in there, and there's no oil on this crankcase, on this crankshaft, because it has to be put on dry. And then I carefully put that in place and bolt that up and tension it, and then I'll measure it just as we've done with the main. Here's the plastic gauge result at 0.002 or possibly somewhere between 0.002 to 0.0015 thou. So between 2 and around about 2 thou anyway. So that in millimeters is somewhere in the region of I can't see it there, but that would be about 0.005 of a millimeter, which is pretty small and very good for a main bearing. So it's not too tight, it's not going to pinch, and it's not too large, it's not going to lose oil pressure. So once I've cleaned off the plastic gauge, I just put a little bit of oil on there, and there's already grease on there, and I do the same on the big end on the piston side, and I clamp it onto the shaft so that it's got pre-lubrication ready before the oil pressure comes up. After I've fitted each cylinder, what I like to do is I like to turn it over by hand just to make sure there's no resistance. And that sounds perfect. And that's how it should be with all 8 cylinders when I'm done. I just want to be a bit more precise about the way these conrods have to be connected to the pistons. These dots face forward because there's a chamfer, if you have a look there, on the uneven cylinders, which is 1, 3, 5 and 7. However, if you look over to the other side, they face the other side on the 2, 4, 6 and 8, because if you look down carefully at it, you will see there's a chamfer on the outside for the crank web and nothing in the middle, therefore the bearings are closer, and another chamfer on the side again, so that the crank web can pass inside of that. So just so you know that the uneven numbers, the dots face forward, the even numbers, the dots face backwards. All the conrods are being put on, they're all in place. Now to take these things off, take a hammer and use the wooden side. Never hit that bearing, that new bearing, with any metal surface. There's a little damage in a second. And now we're going to put a little bit of grease on there. Prepare for the crankshaft. the clearances between the bore fore and aft is about 0.1 of a millimeter from the piston skirt, which is sufficient for clearance. Even if it was a little bit more, it wouldn't worry me. My biggest concern is pistons heating up and basically expanding and getting grabbed inside that cylinder. So a little bit more clearance I'm never worried about, but too fine a clearance is always a problem. But that's basically the same as the micrometer settings, so the electronic vernier does a pretty good job. Right, just to give you some sort of idea, we've got all 8 pistons in now, and just to give you an idea, you turn it over to make sure everything's running right. Now, to give you an idea of the amount of friction that a new engine has, this is almost a foot long, and I have to put in about 20 pounds. So it's about almost 20 foot-pound of torque friction that this engine has just to start with those 8 cylinders, until of course they wear in after a few minutes of running, and then obviously it'll turn a lot easier. But it does take the best part of about 20 to 50 hours to wear in really nicely before the engine can really be opened up and safely be used at top end. The seal that was actually supplied from the USA has got a number on it, USA 32, and then some little square emblem right on the edge of here that you can hardly see. And then it's got that part number, which is 12554314. And actually looking in the casing itself, measuring the casing itself, the outside diameter is 114.98 millimeters, which is almost 115 millimeters. You can see that in inches afterwards, 4.527. And the ID that's actually measuring on the crankshaft itself is 95.07 millimeters. And that's 3.742, it's almost 3.75 inches, and the thickness of it is anywhere between about a ½ inch and 0.56 of an inch, or somewhere between 12 and 14 millimeters. The actual casing only goes in 12 millimeters, but this sort of dust seal part here comes out to make it about 14 millimeters. But that's not that important because there's plenty of room for that. The reason why I'm giving this information is because it's extremely hard to find. The part number for the Volvo Penta is 3856926, and yep, here we are with the pricing of it, 82, 89, nearly 83 bucks, plus you have to go and get the thing and wait a day. So if you look up the parts lists, you'll find that a 97 to 2000 Vortec Chevy 350 5.7 has that same part number. However, it's very, very hard to get the right sizes, and the things I found off of internet are all wrong. So this is the actual size for real. So just a very important piece of information that I'm giving you now, that it's nearly impossible to find on internet.